Are you still waiting for imposter syndrome to just disappear before you write? What if you didn't have to? Hey co-authors, in this episode we're going to take a hard look at how imposter syndrome shows up in academic writing, not just as a feeling, but as a set of behaviors that sabotage your progress. Changing our reactions with imposter syndrome is the first step to taking control of our writing and protecting our mental health. So, let's dive in. I want to start off with a story about a client that I worked with. This was a few years ago. This was an associate professor. They had published enough to get tenure. They had been stuck at the associate professor rank for a while and they wanted to go up for promotion. They were not really a prolific writer though. They wanted some pointers on how to get stuff published. So they come to me and they show me their paper and they're like, hey, I'd like some feedback on this. So I take the paper, I start working with it. Give it back to them about a week later, and it's dripping red ink. Now, I will say, this is not because what they had was bad, right? If you've ever read a review of mine, typically I have two modes. One is, this is not very strong, it's not going to get published, so I'm going to write you a couple of things to help you on your way, but I'm not going to invest a whole lot of time into the review. And then there's stuff that I think has a lot of promise, a lot of potential. And so I give that a lot of feedback because I want to see that grow. This was definitely one of the latter ones. I had given it a lot of feedback because I had seen a lot of potential. So I sent it back to them and waited. A week went by, 2 weeks went by. Finally, in the third week, I emailed them back and was like, hey, sent you that feedback. What did you think? And their response back to me was, I opened up the document, I saw all the feedback, and I just shut it again. And I was like, why? Why would you do that? And I was a little bit miffed because I'd spent a lot of time and a lot of effort giving all this feedback. And they were like, oh, look, obviously I'm not good at this. I never really liked to write. I didn't do that much writing before tenure. I just did it so I could keep my job. Now that I'm here as an associate professor, I don't need to write. I just don't want to do this anymore. I just don't feel like I'm the type of person who should be writing. And they gave up. I'm sorry to say that there's not a happy ending to this story. Like they are still an associate professor. They have not published anything since then. They really just gave up on the idea of advancing in their career. And I just want to tell you, I think that giving up is not really an option for improvement. Like learning is not linear. And writing is not something that you just get better at or that it automatically becomes easier for you to do. You're going to have instances where you write something and it works out. Other times when you write it and it doesn't work out. You're going to have these plateaus and setbacks, and that's normal. But giving up in that process means that you're never going to move beyond where you are right now. And so what I'd like to talk about this week is this idea of imposter syndrome, because I really think that was at the root of this idea that they did not deserve to be a professor. They didn't deserve to have their work published. And so I want us to focus on recognizing and challenging this self-doubt and overcoming this imposter syndrome and navigating a new ethic towards your writing so that way you can start being productive again. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. Hi, my name is Dr. Kyle Reddick, and I'm a full professor at the University of Northern Iowa. I've written dozens of articles, books, chapters, and essays, as well as edited some of the top journals in my discipline. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. So one of the things that I want to start with is the idea that you will overcome imposter syndrome, or that you will eliminate it, or that it will someday go away. I can tell you I've been doing this for over a decade now. I'm a very prolific writer, and yet I still feel bad whenever I notice mistakes in my writing after it's been published. I still feel a sinking in my stomach every time that I hit the final submit button in the journal portal. Like, it doesn't go away. But what we can do is address the behaviors that are associated with it, especially those behaviors that are self-destructive and that are going to get in the way of you being a good writer. In my time of working with different clients and with students, I've found 3 common behaviors I associate with imposter syndrome that really get in the way of people getting their writing done and being happy with it and then moving on to the next project. The first one I would say is I see a lot of people that just procrastinate out of fear that their ideas aren't good enough. So what are some indicators that you're procrastinating? I would say that the more educated you are, you probably get better at fooling yourself or others about how you're being productive even though you're not being productive. Like, we get really good at figuring out how to trick ourselves into believing that we're moving forward, when in actuality, it's more like a car with really high RPMs, but it's still in park. Like, the engine's revving, but you ain't going nowhere. Oftentimes it's overreading. People won't get to the writing portion of their work because they feel like they have to just continue to read things. They go down a rabbit's hole of all of the stuff that they think that they need to read or cite or whatever it might be in order for them to create their work. And of course, you can never read enough. Publication has exploded to the point to where there is, at least from a human perspective, a near infinite amount of scholarship on almost any topic. So the idea that you're going to read everything or even read enough to where you can cover, quote unquote, all of the bases is really outside the realm of possibility. What you can do is do enough reading that you can get a sense of where the conversation is in the scholarly community and add to that, but you're not going to know the ins and outs of everything in that conversation. And so all you're going to end up doing is probably confusing yourself by overreading, trying to hit every possible thing, and then not going anywhere with your writing. I see a lot of over editing. So people, they write maybe a paragraph and then they just sit there and tinker with the paragraph. Maybe they don't even get a paragraph done. Maybe it's just a sentence, maybe even just a few words, but it's just like a constant reevaluation and re-editing of their work. And it fools you into thinking, I'm making progress because words are appearing or are changing on the screen. But again, it's a high RPM, but you're not going anywhere because you're not actually adding to anything. I also see a lot of overcleaning, over-organizing. Speaking for myself, there is never a time whenever I get more grading done than whenever I have a really hard project that I'm working on, because normally I hate grading, absolutely despise it. And so I put it off as much as possible until I have something else that I despise even more, which is writer's block. And then I can tell you that grading, it gets done. You see these things working in tandem with one another, right? And overreading, overediting, overcleaning, grading, whatever it might be. What you're trying to do is to give yourself a semblance of moving forward, but you're not. And you know that on some level, which is why as you continue to do that and expend energy, you continue to get more depressed or anxious or stressed or whatever it might be about your writing and about your project, because you know you're not actually making progress on those things. And so this imposter syndrome, because you don't feel like your ideas are good enough, you just try to do anything that you can to give you that sense of accomplishment. The next thing that I oftentimes see my students and my clients do is they constantly compare themselves to more experienced scholars. So they'll talk about how they're reading X, Y, or Z person. Oh my gosh, they write so much more than I do. They write faster than I do. They write better than I do. They've said this thing. I don't know how I could say it any better than what they've said it. Just this idea of I'm never going to write like this other person, so I shouldn't even try. Yeah, you don't write as well as someone who's probably been doing this work for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You shouldn't, right? That would be foolish to wish that. And in some ways, it's a little bit self-defeating. Like, you would not expect someone to just sit down and be good at baseball or soccer or anything else, no matter what their athletic talent or athletic ability might be, no matter how good your ear for music is. Like, you still have to sit down and do drills and scales and everything else. If you thought I could just sit down, write an article or write a grant or write a thesis or dissertation, and it would automatically just be good because I'm a smart person, that's self-defeating. And in some ways, it really drains the project that you're doing of the expertise and practice that is required for you to be good at it. Because about 1% of the population has not just the intellectual ability, but also the determination, the ability to be open to criticism, the ability to improve on your writing, the ability to see where your mistakes are and to do better. A lot of people simply don't have those skills. So I think there's nothing wrong in recognizing that this is a difficult process. What you are doing is something that only a small part of the population can do. And to start thinking about this more in terms of a process than it is of comparing yourself to someone who's been doing this for years or even decades longer than you have. The final common behavior that I associate with imposter syndrome tends to be people who just avoid submitting or sharing their work. I would say in talking with other editors and other prolific scholars, it's pretty common. Someone's really excited about this idea. They really want to write on this project. Get about 3, 4, 5, 6 months in. Next thing, falling off the face of the planet. I can't get the email. I can't get them on the phone. I don't see them again until the next year at a conference. They avoid me in the halls. They duck into the bathroom as soon as they see me. It's almost comical, the lengths that people will go to in order to not feel the guilt associated with them not getting their work done. And I think there's just this idea that as long as a project is this bright, shiny idea, as long as I never write on it or work on it, then it's always bright and shiny. It's always something that I look forward to. It's always something that I can talk about at conferences, and it never loses that shine or luster. I think that some people have this fear that whenever they write on an idea, that they somehow make that idea smaller, that now it's tarnished, or that's somehow less than it was before. And so what's the way to address that? You just never write on it. Or you just change topics so frequently that you never really make progress on any of them. I had this master's student years ago. We worked all summer on this project together. This was going to be their thesis. They were really excited about it. Got into the fall semester, got a few months in, got a little stressed. They're taking classes, trying to finish their thesis. Stop writing. And they don't write anything from like October into January. Keep trying to get them to write, have meetings every other week, trying to help them through this writer's block. Nothing seems to work. January rolls around and they're like, okay, I spent my winter break writing. I was like, oh, thank God, because you need to get done. And they're like, I've got this completely different idea for my thesis. And I was like, oh my God, no. They gave me like a 15-minute presentation on why they just had to change their topic, and changing their topic was going to be the thing that solved every problem, and how once they did that, everything was going to be fine. They were going to start making progress again. Spoiler alert, they in fact did not finish their thesis. So if these behaviors sound familiar to you, if you think that you've been engaging in them because of your imposter syndrome, then the first thing that I want to say is that you are not alone. This is not something that's unique to you. You're not the first person to go through this, nor will you be the last. In fact, many authors, both within academic research and in other genres of writing, continue to struggle with all sorts of imposter syndrome, writer's block, deadline issues, all sorts of things. So you are a part of a long line of people who are in this space. That being said, we can't stay here and we can't give up, because that means that we're not developing our writing. It means that ultimately we're not being successful in achieving our goals. There's a couple of things that I think that you can practice to jumpstart yourself out of these behaviors and start going into a better direction. So the first thing I would say is, if you think of your scholarship as this monumental contribution, not monumental in the sense that you think that your work is that great, or that's going to revolutionize your field of study. Rather, it's monumental because it's a monumental effort on your part. It is perhaps one of the few times, if not the only time in your life, that you are really challenging yourself and moving beyond the litany of good grades, gold stars, pats on the head that you've gotten in the past, and really put yourself into this very vulnerable position where you have a committee, if you're doing a thesis or dissertation, or you have reviewers, if you're doing any type of scholarly work. And for the first time, you might be getting very harsh criticism back. And that's a very vulnerable place to be. But it's also the place of growth, right? Like, you don't grow by getting an endless series of A's. You grow whenever someone points something out to you that you can improve on, and then you build on that technique. And so I think reframing scholarship from being this idea of what is my contribution as this sort of final product, and instead thinking, how am I growing through the process of this writing? How am I adding on to the process of this conversation? And thinking about it more in terms of the long term, what's happening in this scholarly conversation. I think doing that changes the stakes of the game. It takes you away from being out of this sort of fixed mindset where I know X, I'm the expert of X, and here's what I know about X, to instead being a more growth mindset. And as a result, looking at all feedback as an opportunity to develop yourself and to grow, rather than as a threat or an insult to your intelligence. So I have two challenges for you that I hope help you reframe your imposter syndrome and start working through it a little bit more, so that way you can get into the actual writing of whatever project that you're working on right now. The first thing that I would say is I think it's really important for you to keep a praise file. This could be emails, feedback that you've gotten from reviewers or from instructors, publications that you've had, anything that you might have that kind of gives you the warm fuzzies whenever you take a look at it. Those things can be good reminders that you're not a stupid person, even if you sometimes feel like that. You're not a lazy person, even if sometimes you don't get your work done. You're not a bad person whenever someone gives you a review back and it makes you feel bad. You are a smart, competent, hardworking person who's facing this moment where they're facing doubts. And that's okay. So having those documents, having those artifacts there to help remind you of your worth, to help remind you that you can do this. I think doing this is just a really good way of combating the sort of icky feelings that you feel, and to really take a step back, remind yourself, and start to feel good again about the things that you're doing, the things you've accomplished, and the things you will do and you will accomplish. So the second thing that I would say to do is to set goals and to limit yourself with time. I found that early in my career, where I like to do my writing is Panera. I don't know why. There's just something about the sound of the bagel machine, the easy listening music, the hum of people, all those things that just really help me focus my ADD down and really just lock in on my writing. But whenever I very first started writing, I'd go there and I would write for sometimes 6 or 8 hours at a time. I'd just be there all day. I'd come back home just reeking of bread and stale coffee. I would get a lot done. What I found, though, was as I moved forward, I had other duties, other responsibilities coming into my life, and I wasn't able to go 3, 4, 5 times a week to Panera and write for 8 hours. And so whenever that was the case, whenever I didn't get to go there, I would have far less time to write, which meant that I didn't have all this time to lollygag and answer a few emails, and maybe watch a few videos on YouTube and do this and do that, and also to get some writing done. But instead, I just had to get there and get done with my writing. There was something about this idea about you've traveled to Panera, you're in this place, there's nothing else to be done other than to just sit here and write. And you've only got so much time to do it. That helped focus me. And so for myself, giving myself those sort of limited resources helped me focus and be productive. I would encourage you to do the same thing. Try to find a place and a time that you can focus in on your writing. Don't go to the library or your office or wherever and just be like, okay, I've got 8 hours to write. What am I going to write about? Because then you're just going to stare at a page and you're going to get frustrated. And then you're going to feel even worse because you had all of this time and you didn't get as much accomplished as you wanted to. Instead, give yourself limited resources, a specific place, a specific amount of time, and see if that helps you. Conversely, give yourself something to aspire to. I want to write 100 words or 300 words, and I'm not going to leave my office, Panera, wherever, until I write that many words. I think that doing these sorts of things can help focus your mind and help break you out of the despondency that oftentimes accompanies imposter syndrome and the behaviors that are a part of that. All right, folks, that's going to be it for me today. But I want to reiterate again that imposter syndrome is incredibly common. It's also manageable. Even if you feel it for the next few years or even for the rest of your life, that doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be a barrier for you to get your work done. If you start to develop the tools and the mindset that helps you identify whenever it's creeping up on you, recognize whenever you're engaging in unproductive behaviors, and then to reframe those behaviors with other things so that way you can start being productive again. Now, I will say these are a couple of things that I do that have helped me. They're things that I tell my own students or my own clients to help them galvanize themselves into getting into a new headspace. But I'd be interested to know, what are some things that you're doing? So reach out to me, let me know. What are some practices that you've been told by your instructors or by your mentors? What are things that you assign to your students or to the people that you're working with? Any of that information is helpful, not only because then I can pass it on to my own students or my clients or my colleagues. I can also share that information with the rest of you all so we can all reach our goals, write the things that we're passionate about, and get our work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you all in the next episode. Hey writers, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant ideas shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. If you have the time, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast, leave a positive review, assign this to your classes, or share it with a colleague. All those things help get the word out and let me know what I can do to make this podcast the best resource for you. Also, if you'd like to set up a time to chat with me about your next big idea, then you can find my information in the podcast description where you can schedule a time. So until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.